My pleasure to introduce Sungwoo. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Ethics Education at Seoul National University, studying ethics, applied ethics, and social and political philosophy. His work has been published in top journals such as Philosophical Studies, American Philosophical Quarterly, and the Journal of Moral Education. And he has received prestigious awards, including Best Paper Awards, an Analytic Philosophy Award, and the NIH's Director's Award. Today he has present his talk, Deception in Human Subject Research, How to Be an Honest Researcher.
Okay. Thank you for coming. I see many familiar faces and new faces. I'm glad to see all of them. So today I'm going to talk about how to be an honest researcher in the context of deception in human subject research. So you may know I kind of understand honesty as respect for what I call right not to be deceived. So this will be kind of application of that concept. So here's the overview of today's talk. So I'm going to introduce why I'm talking about this and briefly introduce what I mean by this respect for the right not to be deceived. And also I'll try to think about what an honest research plan would look like, and then I examine first, okay, can we do something after the participation of the subjects or before participation, and conclude. And here are preliminary assumptions. So I'll assume that there will be no expected benefit for the subjects. And I'll say deception is sometimes, at least sometimes, ethically permissible. I'll just assume that. And also, the intention of deceptive research is for good social value. It's not in itself, it's not for bad purpose. And also, I'll assume some sort of deception is essential for the given research purpose. Okay, good. So there are many kinds of research that involves human subject research that seems to kind of require deception for the desired outcome. So when we recruit human subjects, and then we need to deceive in some way so that they can give us some honest response in a sense. So in a famous experiment in psychology, which is Milgram's experiment, so the participants are deceived so that they believe they're actually giving electric shock when they're not, so that they can so that the researchers can observe what's actual human nature, something like that. And also in medical field as well, so placebo control. For that to be effective, they should just believe that what I'm taking is an actual pill rather than just sugar pill. So these are kind of familiar phenomena. And it has some similar structure to the candid camera. So you're walking down the street and you see some embarrassing scenery, and then you think it's naturally happening, but then you've been filmed for that. And then, but that's kind of required. That's the point of deceiving you, because if you already knew that you're being filmed, then you try to just show the reaction that you want yourself to be seen by others, but to prevent that, it should be deceived. And when the research has this kind of structure, I mean, it seems to be conflicting with the requirement of getting informed consent. So this is a way of respecting the participants' autonomy. Okay, you choose whether you want to participate or not. But if there's deception involved, and there are two reasons that it seems to be conflicting with the spirit of informed consent. First is irreversibility of deception. So once you deceive someone, it is hard, if not impossible, to undo it or somehow make up for it. You may be very fortunate if that person forgive you or something like that, but still you cannot know beforehand. And that's related to the second, opaqueness of the subject's will. So I'm not sure whether I'm for determinism or not, but if we are assuming that all others are just free agents, then it should be by principle opaque to me whether this person would like to participate in this research or not. That's why we should ask explicitly, giving all the relevant information, and then get the informed consent. But if we involve deception, then we cannot just know it because it's opaque. So in this kind of context, if we want to be an honest researcher, this can be a problem. So there are some research, showing that the researchers are feeling some sort of moral distress about deceiving the subject, even if it's for some good academic goals. But still, there's a report. Everyone who was involved in the experiment was and continues to be doubtful and guilty about their part in the study. That's a kind of report from the researchers or research assistants. And also, from the larger perspective, the researchers may lose their trust from the public because, they always try to deceive. And if this distrust is this kind of prevailing, then either they don't want to participate, or they just expect that, like psychology department undergrad kids, right? They know what's going on. Okay, so I know what's going on, and then like they're reacting in a way that's not natural. So like they kind of, maybe this is for something else. Maybe I don't know what's that, but like I'm not gonna show my natural self. So that might be the kind of side effect for that. So today's research question would be, how would an honest researcher make a plan for such deceptive research without losing its scientific validity? So I'm trying to examine that possibility. For that, I need to introduce my own kind of account of honesty. So I believe respect for the right not to be deceived at the core of the virtue of honesty. And that means, according to my account, an honest researcher would respect the subject's right not to be deceived. So briefly, I would just assume that you can read some of my other papers where I try to ground this, but here I'll just, based on our natural, I think, desire to be in touch with the reality. Even if you may not have to inform me or like force me to get closer to the truth, but at least it'd be reasonable, I think, to assume that I have some sort of right not to be deceived by others. So like, even if you don't have right to give me the truth or give me the knowledge that I want, but still, I'm trying to get to the knowledge or get to the truth, but you're intervening in the way. Okay, don't do that. I have right not to be deceived about what I'm trying to know about. So that's the assumption here. That means, okay, the subject has the right not to be deceived by the researcher about the information relevant to the research. So research purpose, method, risk, and benefits. So this is just gonna be an assumption in this talk. Okay, then now we're the researcher planning about, like, maybe we might be a psychologist or some medical researcher trying to kind of make a plan about the research that may involve deception for the purpose of scientific validity. So we examine, okay, then how can we address the possibility of dishonesty problem by changing or modifying some plan. So we can think about after participation phase and before participation phase. First, after participation. One possibility is trying to compensate for this person's being deceived. So you may try, okay, you've been deceived, and I'm sorry about that. And then I try to give you some free coupon or money or material rewards, fancy watch. I mean, if the deception is traumatic or something like that, then, okay, is that the compensation? I mean, some of people might like it, but it seems to involve some disrespect. So if it's not just a matter of harming, but kind of wronging, so that means some disrespect is involved in it already. So that's not something you can just compensate for with some material goods. And it may even be insulting to someone. Okay, you deceived me and then you believe I'm the kind of person who would be just pleased by getting some money? I mean, that can be worse. And what about like showing some fitting attitude? Okay, I deceived you, so I sincerely apologize, or I seek forgiveness. Or I can just say, oh, I really appreciate your participation or being deceived. Thank you for being deceived or something like that. But still, I mean, apologizing, think about it. Like when your friend comes to you and then deceives you, okay, he got your money out of line, and then says, sorry about that. And then he already knew that you're going to be mad or something like that. But you did it anyway. That means you didn't care about my choice, right? My own attitude. So that can be kind of a way of respecting. Like, okay, you saying sorry. Okay, you could have just prevented it. You did it anyway, even if you knew that you're going to have to say sorry. That means at the moment of doing it, you did something wrong to me. That cannot be an ethical thing to do. And seeking forgiveness too. Okay, I don't know which movie it was, but there is a kind of saying that my mom said, not my mom, the character of the movie, my mom said it's easier to seek for forgiveness rather than seeking for the permission beforehand. Just do it and seek for forgiveness. And that's kind of true, but that's not way of respecting this person, because the point of asking beforehand is giving the person to some kind of room for declining. Okay, I choose to participate. Then that's when this person's autonomy is respected. And third, the gratitude. What about gratitude? Like you say, thank you for being deceived. It's analogous to, for a thief saying, thank you for being stolen for me. And then it's kind of, they're involuntary victims. It would be absurd to say thank you. So for these reasons, like trying to show some seemingly fitting attitude would not fail to respect the researcher. I mean the participants, perhaps involuntary participants, because participation based on misinformation can be involuntary. And one very famous and popular way of addressing this issue is debriefing. This, which is just informing the subject about the deception. For example, its use and rationale at the end of the participation. So here's a kind of rule. Maybe I guess many of you are more familiar to this than myself. So the point is, explain deception as soon as possible, at least no later than at the conclusion of the data collection. Maybe this is for giving the option of like withdrawing the data collected here. So. But still, is it enough? And still, here's the challenge. First is, due to the irreversibility of deception, informed consent can never be made retrospectively, right? So would you have agreed to this if you know in it? That's kind of meaningless, because I have no choice now after the participation. And also, debriefing is neither a way of respecting the subject's R&D, right, not to be deceived, nor a way of making up for the disrespect already given to the subject R&D. And also, importantly, the opportunity to withdraw the collected data is different from the opportunity not to participate. I've been thinking about this whenever I see something similar to candid camera, right? So I was walking down the street, I was already embarrassed, and like it's not just that I can prevent showing myself, like embarrassing myself to the public by, okay, I'm not gonna allow you to broadcast it. Okay, but still, I'm already embarrassed, and then maybe now I'm feeling bad about myself because, I showed some kind of reaction that I've been believing I would be reacting virtuously, but I was running away, for example, from the fire alarm, whatever, rather than trying to save others. Okay, even if all the public may not see that, but you guys are already seeing it, and now I see who I am now, which I might have been just living without knowing it. But anyway, so it's different from just like, okay, I'll give you a choice. Okay, would you let us broadcast it or not? I mean, there's different kind of opportunity. So I would say, oh, it seems to be kind of difficult to, I don't know, make up for that kind of disrespect after participation. Then let us see any possibility before the participation. And first is reasonable expectation. So this is just, okay, I'm planning at this moment, planning stage of the research, and we can just plan the deceptive research based on reasonable expectation of the deception's possible harms on the subject, or such as mental distress, or their possible response to the awareness of deception. We can guess, right? I think try to be as reasonable as possible in expecting this person's response after being deceived. So here's a kind of case of medical participants. IRB should consider allowing deceptive research only when one of the conditions they suggested was, okay, if it's gonna likely to be affect their willingness to participate, then okay, if it's considered, that's kind of, I don't know, that may be a way of showing respect to their R&D in my terms. But let's examine some possible scenarios to see whether it works or not. So in scenario 1, the subject does feel emotional distress by the awareness of deception, and says that I would never have participated in this study if I'd known that it involved this kind of deception. But okay, in this scenario, because the researcher had some reasonable expectation about this person's, what this person's response would be, just based on, okay, any reasonable person would not be mad about this. And then, but this maybe perhaps unreasonable person is responding in a way that was not reasonably expected by the researcher. But what is important here is not how epistemically reasonable the researcher's expectation about the impact was, but whether this person actually makes the choice. And this is something beyond our reasonable expectation. We cannot just blame this subject for not being like other reasonable people. This kind of perhaps idiosyncratic response might be just something we should respect. So what matters in the context of respecting someone is that person's particular individual subject agency. So even if that response was kind of unusual, even weird to many people, but still, that's this person's autonomy that should be respected. So in scenario 2, this time, this person does not feel any emotional distress. I mean, I'm happy with that. I'm okay with that. Even if I've known about this deception, I'll still have participated in this. But still, okay, but whether this person's right not to be deceived is disrespected or not is not determined by whether this right holder likes it or not. Think about slaves. Let's say there was some age where even slaves themselves felt like, oh, I don't have any right to autonomy or something like that. And then they were just okay with their masters just maltreating them or something like that. But that doesn't make it right. So even if the right holder may just be okay about like their right being disrespected, that can still be a wrong thing to do. I mean, it may, and those people who are just okay with their right being violated might show some sort of servility or low self-esteem. So it does not depend on the actual response of the participants. And also, here, one of the conditions we need to think about, as suggested, was whether it would affect the willingness to participate. But in scenario 2, this person says, okay, I would have participated anyway. That means it wouldn't affect this person's willingness to participate. But in relation to the challenge 1, the willingness to participate would not have affected by that. So even when it's not affected, right not to be deceived can still be disrespected. So this condition is not good enough for saving it. Okay, so what's the other possibility? That is getting the consent to the deception itself, which is not very easy. So one way to do it is getting an informed consent to be deceived in a given study. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a lie, so you should believe it. I mean, it doesn't work, right? That's the nature of deception. Once someone warns you about like the possible deception, it is very hard to be deceived about. But we can ask somehow the subject to waive their R&D, right, not to be deceived, before the participation. And here's some interesting concept suggested by Dave Wendler, which is second-order consent. So it's kind of authorized deception. So according to this, you should be aware that in order to complete this study, several of its details cannot be accurately described to you. For this reason, these details have been intentionally misdescribed. So kind of warning about possible deception involved here. And okay, I'm okay with some kind of deception involved in it. But the problem is this seems to be kind of global consent to deception. Okay, there'll be some sort of deception involved in this research, but I'm still not aware of what kind of deception that is. And so the particular aspect of deception cannot be revealed to the subject because, as I said, okay, I'm going to lie to you about whether I have a girlfriend or not. And then I said, I have a girlfriend. Okay, you don't have a girlfriend. That's like how our like epistemic and the function works. So just globally consenting to use of deception is not enough. So here's a kind of analogous case. This might be going too far. You can talk about it. So would you do me a favor? And yes, of course. That happens a lot of time. I don't know what that favor is, but still I kind of say yes. Would you marry me? And then like, no way, right? But this is kind of global consent. But oh, I didn't know that's like asking me to marry you. Then, but you said yes already. But it seems that it's like that doesn't count. It's something similar is going on, this kind of global consent. So what's the other possibilities? So there are some, I think, room for at least kind of mitigating the dishonesty problem here. One is giving some disjunctive information. So it can be more specific, but not knowing. We can say, okay, I'm going to give you A or B. But I'm not going to tell you whether it is A or B. So in case of placebo experiment, okay, this pill may be effective pill or the medical pill or just sugar pill. I'm not going to tell you what that is. Would you agree to participate in this research? And then, okay, I know which part is part of the deception, but still, I'm okay with that. I don't know which one will be given to me, but that's okay. And that's good enough for the research purpose as well. So that's one possibility. The other is specifying the domain of deception. So it's not globally getting the consent and just saying that, okay, some sort of deception, but it's letting them know which aspect is the aspect of deception. So you may be deceived concerning X. So to give a kind of analogy again, when you play poker, we kind of waive our right not to be deceived about what kind of cards you're holding. That's called bluffing, right? That we don't take that as deceiving. You're not going to be mad or blame other people for bluffing, because that's kind of at least implicit waiving of that right. Just like that, I mean, okay, we are gonna, even if that we don't say it explicitly usually, but we can say, okay, we are gonna waive our right about, what kind of cards we are holding. So it's kind of agreeing to be deceived about what kind of card we are holding. That's the domain. That's the domain. But we are not agreeing to be deceived about whether you have an extra card in your sleeves or not. That's a different domain. So about that kind of deception, we didn't agree. So in that way, we can specify the domain of deception, thereby giving enough information to get the consent to the deceptive research, but still that's good enough for the research purpose. So these are just like examples of possible way of addressing the deception problem in human subject research. So here's a conclusion. So human subject research is kind of located in a funny way, because it's scientific research, but still it's some sort of human interaction between two different agents, two different persons. So that means, okay, even if it's important to get scientifically valid result, but this kind of ethical aspect of human interaction should be addressed first. And that's why the researchers should try to be honest to the human subjects. So, and I suggested that to be an honest researcher, one should strive to respect the human subject, right? Not to be deceived in the research. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
About 15 minutes for questions. Taya, you can start off.
Everyone's very good. Thank you. I love this idea of the respect for the right not to be deceived. And I'm thinking about honesty and this respect for the right not to be deceived, and how you would prioritize it relative to value of research. So having sat on our IRB as a member of the review board for over a decade, the key determining thing of whether deception is okay is do the benefits outweigh the harms, right? And so if we acknowledge this is a harm, right, the dishonesty, and then it's really hard to not to respect someone with it. How do you think about sort of that as an evaluation? Given this is a harm, the benefits of research, do they outweigh it? And how should we make that determination? Because I think ideally you'd be able to be honest and then still be able to do the research, but in some cases maybe not. So how do you think of honesty relative to the other value of the research?
Yeah, so I'm not an absolutist, so that means I'm open to the possibility where, let's say, like there's research trying to make the COVID vaccine, and that's a matter of like the life of so many people. If that's the case, some sort of deception might be overridden by what is more important. I'm open to that opportunity. So if it's like heavy enough, it can override at some point. But what I'm talking about here is like before we think about that, because that's not for the benefit of the research subject themselves. So that's what I assumed at the beginning. Because if it may complicate the issue, because, okay, I deceived you for your own sake. That might be a kind of case of paternalism maybe. Still, that's for your own good, so that's different from, okay, I deceive you for the good of others. That happens a lot for like kind of trying to find the new medicine for the future patients or something like that. But still, I'm open to the possibility where what is at stake is so important, some sort of deception may be overridden, but what I tried to do here was, okay, let's say just that's not that clear. And even if it's a case that the importance of the result may override this, even in that case, it would be better if we can just look for an alternative way of research planning so that we can, okay, it's not matter of overriding. It's now a matter of, okay, so I didn't involve any kind of ethically objectionable deception anyways. So, and the result is good. That's much better. So I'm talking about how to make the research plan so that we don't have any morally problematic issue that should be overridden by the much better result. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much for this. I found this helpful. I wanted to ask you about what you said about apologizing. So if I understood you correctly, you were saying that apologizing to the participants for deceiving them, that doesn't show respect for their right to not be deceived. So I wanted to push back on that. I thought, well, you might ask. So I actually have done this before. Apologize, and I think it makes sense for a researcher to say, if you ask them why did you apologize to them, to say because I respect their right not to be deceived. And maybe one way of making sense of that is that by apologizing, it's an expressive action. It's expressing the fact that you acknowledge that they had a right not to be deceived and that you care about that. And, right. So I guess this sort of raises the question of what's meant by respecting the right not to be deceived. If it, expressing my acknowledgement of the right and my care, my valuing of the right isn't showing respect. What is showing respect?
Okay, great. Thanks. I mean, in relation to the first question, there might be the case where, okay, overall, all things considered, deception was necessary. And then say, I'm sorry. But apologizing in a proper sense is kind of more than just expressing my bad feeling about that having to be the case. So what I had in my mind was, okay, you could have think more about not deceiving this person, but you deceived this person anyways, and just say sorry. Okay, then in the case where it's overridden and that you are just expressing bad feeling about that having to be the case, that's one case. The other is, okay, so I don't know this result is good enough to override this, but still I think deception is needed for my research. And then, okay, I'll forget about it. I'll just say sorry afterward. If that's the mentality, then saying sorry shows that you did it anyway. You knew that there's something to say sorry about, right? Beforehand. You just enforced to do that anyways. And then saying sorry, that seems to be insincere. That's why I thought this is not a way of respecting it. So if you just express, of course, if you're a virtuously honest researcher, and then, okay, this is about COVID vaccine research, which is very, very important. And I don't see any alternative except that it's the research that involves some sort of deception. Then, I'm sorry, I say that. And I had to use deception because the result is so important. And the research participant might more likely to be okay with that because I understand that's kind of so important thing to do. But the case I had in my mind was okay, that's not the case, but apologizing is not just way of expressing some virtuous disposition, but rather, okay, I just needed this. I think apologizing would just clean it up. That's the attitude I was talking about. But thanks a lot for that possibility.
Great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that often comes up in human subjects research is the question of vulnerable populations. So if you are doing a research study with children, pregnant women, fetuses, incarcerated people, people who are mentally ill or incapacitated in some way, you have to go through additional IRB training and additional IRB approval in order to work with those. But, and I'm thinking about this particularly in the case of scientific research with children, it's the parents that give the consent for the children, not the children giving consent for themselves.
Sure.
In fact, a child is probably unable to understand what it would mean for me to tell you version A of the story instead of version B of the story if there's some deception as to which version of the story you were going to get or something like that. So how do you think about the fact that parents lie to their children all the time? Parents put their children into situations in which the child's autonomy might not be respected all the time. Society is constantly setting up expectations for children that are not true and don't have respect for their autonomy and respect for their not being deceived. How do you think about that in terms of conducting scientific research with minors? And other vulnerable populations too. It's just that I work with minors.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this different possibility. And when I introduced right not to be deceived, I was assuming like fully grown rational agent. Because,
So kids don't have a right not to be deceived?
at least it can be different. Because, I mean, think about paternalism. So when we show some kind of paternalistic attitude to other adults, agents, then that's morally objectionable, usually regarded. But with parents, I'm a parent, so I lie about Santa Claus, and I sometimes feel like I'm being paternalistic, and I force them to sometimes do some math homework. It's good for you in the future. You don't know about the world. And that's paternalistic. But it's okay because I'm a dad. So in that sense, there should be, at least to some extent, there should be some difference, because it depends on like how old they are, how their cognitive skills are developed or something. It's not just based on their absolute age, but still, let's say they're like 7-year-old child, then I try to respect their autonomy, but it's my real life case. So like, but then they're in between grown-up adults and little puppies. So like, unlike puppies, they do understand some of the words and they're rational to some extent, but they're not as responsible or understanding or wise as adults. So it was very hard for me to hit the balance between those two. I cannot just train like they're little puppies or just fully respect. So I do respect children as they are, but the way I do it might be different from the way I respect the grown-ups. So in this case, I don't know, I mean, if the child is young enough, very young, so that the parents have to do all the works, and if this setting itself is justified, then I think it can be applied to how I treat the parents. So yeah, so that's how I see it. But I'm not sure like how far I should go about like the vulnerable or marginal population. But still, I mean, there should be some sort of differences, because right not to be deceived seems to, I mean, I think assume some sort of ability to pursue the truth and the ability to handle the truth they get or something like that. So, but I didn't go deep enough about it, but I'll think more about it. Thank you very much.
I think Brian did
Okay.
Super interesting. I noticed all of your study designs entail participants knowing their participants. And it just made me think of studies, like audit studies, where there's an intervention, but people do not know that they're participants. And I wonder if that changes your thinking at all. So these would be studies like sending fake job resumes into open positions, or the one that really came to mind for me, which people are probably familiar with, faculty being sampled. They were sent fake emails from potential students or prospective students, and they did not know that they were part of a study. But one of the IRBs involved had the researchers go back to people and say that they had been participants. Many, I think, were not, didn't respond to that. Some were grateful and happy about the rationale of the research and the work that was being done. And then others were very upset that they were participants without knowing it, and also they were deceived by these fake emails. And so it raised this question in a meeting of IRBs across universities of going back to Tia's question of deception versus harm. Was it right to go back and tell them? Did the harm come from the honesty rather than the dishonesty?
Oh, that's very interesting case. So like, if once you know that, I mean, you're participating some sort of research, and you have misinformation about that research, I mean, that's kind of worse. But in the case of the professor being examined without their knowing, and if it's anonymous, that's, I think, a different matter, because they don't even know that they did participate, and no one knows who participated. And then if that's the case, there might be no effect. It's very general kind of research going on there. So in that case, I don't know, I should think more about it, but still, we can say in that kind of case, it might be better not to inform them about like that deception or participation. Like, I don't know, I mean, I'm not sure it's kind of matter of participation, because that may require some sort of personal commitment or something like that. But in the case of fake resumes, they're just doing their job. Maybe they're having to do some extra work might be something to think about. But apart from that, I don't know, like sometimes letting them know might be worse. I mean, I didn't say it here, but I said something about debriefing as well. Like, is it always better to debrief about their, like, the deception happened before? Because it might be better for that person, like, not to know about that. But that may the case by case thing. But yeah, so that's very interesting case. So, and I would say it depends on whether it's anonymous or not, and then whether that they give them any burdens to them. Let's say they were just living everyday life, there's no effect. Someone just observed them, but no one can identify them, let's say. They're just watching the people walking down the street and try to generalize what they're doing and their face expression or something like that, but there's no personal information involved there. So when I was working at NIH, there's some bioethical issue concerning the identity of the DNA or like some genetic information. So when does that part of my gene or some part of my organization becomes bioethical issue? That's when one can identify that. So when it's not, that's not, the science not kind of bioethical issue, because no one is gonna know about it, and even the unknown participant and stuff. So like if it's anonymous enough, and even the researcher or the readers of the articles based on research or the participant, no one identifies that person, and also there's no, I don't know, harm. So like giving extra burden of like having to evaluate the fake job document, job application, that might be kind of another issue apart from the deception itself. So like, 'cause we can consider those aspects, but yeah, if it's anonymous enough and giving not much of impact on their just everyday life, maybe that's not on the table of ethical issue. But it depends on the particular cases. So thanks for that question.
Thanks for the talk. I wanted to check whether all these kind of examples of deceptive research were actually kind of dishonest on your view. This kind of goes back to the other questions about what exactly it means to respect the right not to be deceived. It was obvious to me that in order to respect that right, I need to grant it overwhelming priority when I'm deciding what to do. So, as long as I consider it to be very important, I don't go against it lightly. But in some cases where that right to not be deceived really is overridden by other considerations, maybe I'll have to go ahead with the deception. And in that case, it wouldn't be that the demands of honesty are just having to be foregone for the greater good or whatever. It's just that in those cases, all their honesty demands is that I respect that you're right.
Mhm.
I did respect it, I just, when respecting it, didn't think that it was,
Mhm.
final priority over everything else. So in some cases, it might mean actually honesty, as you understand it, is consistent with this kind of research.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So like, I deal with these kind of cases in my first two papers. Like, this is my third paper. So first paper, which is published in Journal of Moral Education, it's called Honesty, Respect for the Right Not to be Deceived. Pretty much straightforward. So I try to establish what that is. And the second paper, the boundaries of honesty and dishonesty. I examine different cases where I examine the cases of lying, misleading, stealing, or bullshitting, something like that. And then I try to show why sometimes even honest person can do something that falls under the category of lying or misleading and bullshitting. And then I try to make sense of it based on respect for R&D. And there I discuss the case where, in one case, the R&D, right not to be deceived, is waived in the case of poker game, the bluffing case. Because you waived, deceiving you about in that domain is okay. Even if I deceive you, sometimes lie, still that's not out of my dishonesty, because it's not out of my disrespect for you. And some cases it's forfeited. I use the case of Nazi at the door. Because of the ill will of this person forfeited the right not to be deceived about the whereabouts of this Jewish family or something like that. And that's the case where the right is forfeited. It's not a case where it's overridden by something more important. The third case is where, I have to deceive my friend who still holds that right not to be deceived, but there's no time to explain to him. So I have to lie to him and deceive him to save someone else's life. And let's say that's the case, and that's the case where the right not to be deceived is overridden by something more important. Maybe if I'm honest enough, then when I have time, maybe that thing happened. Later I can tell why I lied to you, but this is the reason, something like that. Then like explaining what was going on, or as Ryan said, like expressing some bad feeling about my having to deceive you, even if it's important thing to express some respect, even if in this case, because of the overriding reason, my respect was not manifested as a form of not deceiving, but still the cases where all things considered, deceiving is right thing to do. That shows that, that deception was not coming from my dishonesty or disrespect for you. It comes from the unusual circumstance where it is necessary for something very important. Yes.
I cut off questions there, sorry, because we need to set up Zoom for the next speaker, but I want to thank Sungwoo for an excellent talk.
Okay, thank you very much.